I'm going to tell you about the book The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. This book is the story of a group of young men who during the 1936 Olympics beat Adolf Hitler's team in the Olympics for the crewing championship, the gold medal. Hitler fancied his team the strongest in the world, and this group of college boys from Washington State put him to shame. So The Boys in the Boat is told from the viewpoint of one of the rowers. His name was Joe, and he is the most unlikely of champions. He never set foot in a crewing shell before he arrived on campus, and in fact, he probably wasn't even destined for college if it hadn't been for that crewing team. If you made the team, you were guaranteed a part-time job. And Joe came from beyond dirt poor. In fact, when he was 10 years old, his stepmother banished him from the house. One warm summer afternoon, her tension and frustration finally boiled over. She was in the kitchen shoving pans around the stovetop angrily while Joe was outside, down on his hands and knees, working in his vegetable garden. That little garden plot was a sanctuary for him. He was in charge of it, not Thula, and it was a source of enormous pride. When he could bring a fresh basket of tomatoes or an armful of sweet corn in the cabin, and then see them on the dinner table that night, he felt that he was contributing. He felt he was helping Thula, maybe making up for whatever he might have done lately to annoy her. That afternoon, as Joe was working his way down row after row, pulling weeds, he turned around to find his 18-month-old brother following him. Mike was imitating Joe, only he wasn't pulling weeds. He was plucking half-grown carrots out of the ground. Joe turned and bellowed at him in rage. Mike unleashed a long, wailing scream. A moment later, Thula ran down the steps, red-faced and seething. She snatched Mike up from the ground, whisked him into the cabin, and slammed the door behind her. When Joe's father came home from work later that evening, Thula was waiting for him in the doorway. She demanded that he take Joe out back and whip him with a belt. But Harry merely took him upstairs and gave him a good talking to instead. Thula exploded. She declared that she would not live under the same roof as Joe, that Harry must choose between him and her. She said Joe would have to move out if she were to stay in such a godforsaken place. Joe was only 10 years old. Early the next morning, Joe's father led him up the wagon road to the schoolhouse at the top of the hill. He left Joe sitting outside on the steps and went in to talk to the male schoolteacher. Joe sat and waited in the morning sunlight. He drew circles in the dust with a stick and stared sadly at Steller's jay. The bird had perched on a nearby branch and began screeching at him. It seemed to Joe that even the bird was scolding him. After a long while, his father and the teacher emerged from the schoolhouse and shook hands. They had struck a deal. Joe was to chop enough kindling and split enough wood to keep the school's huge stone fireplace stoked day and night. In return, he would have a place to stay. From now on, he was going to sleep at the school. So the story kind of flips back and forth between Joe at college and Joe trying to fend for himself as a kid all the way up through until he does go to college. In the end, they win the gold medal and go on to the fame that history brings you. It's a really good true story that you can find in our library. The call number is 797.12 MON, or ask Mrs. Gumtoe.